On this prequel episode, we've got our Ever After fan poll follow-up. We're learning about period films and previewing The Remains of the Day. Hello and welcome back to This Film Is Lit, the podcast where we're talking about movies that are based on books. Back to another prequel episode. Let's just get right into it with our patron shoutouts. We have two new patrons,
not quite,
but not really. This week, we have one patron who is upgrading from the $2 level to the $5 level, gaining access to our bonus content, and that patron is Caleb (parentheses NEM). I don't know what that stands for.
I don't either.
It shall remain a mystery. But thank you for upgrading and getting access to all of our bonus content, our entire backlog of bonus content, as well as future bonus content, which we will have an episode out in just a few days for Cinderella, on Cinderella, the 1997 Rodgers and Hammerstein version. So look out for that. Around the end of the week, you should be seeing that episode. And we have one returning patron at the $15 Academy Award winning level, and that is Jeff Niederhofer. Jeff, thank you for coming back and supporting us again. We appreciate it. And that leads us to our Academy Award winning patrons that we shout out every week on our prequel episodes, every other week. And they are Paul Kattensminger, Ben Wilcox, Jeff Niederhofer, Teresa Schwartz, Ian from Wine Country, My Favorite Game, Winchester's Forever, Kelly Napier, Gray Hightower, Eli Young, Scratch, Just Scratch, Shelby says Monsters and Mayhem is out now. That Darn Skag, V. Frank, My Favorite Cinderella is the one from the Fable series of comics, and Alina Starkov. Thank you all very much for supporting us at the $15 level. We appreciate it very much. I'm trying to figure out what My Favorite Game means. So there's a video game, that's the only thing I could find. I did a quick search. There's no video game called The Remains of the Day. There's a game called What Remains of Edith Finch. I don't know if that's what that's a reference to.
I don't know.
It's a very well-known, critically acclaimed game from a few years ago. Only thought because it's somewhat similar to The Remains of the Day, and that is, I believe, one of our name change patrons. So let us know, or maybe it's a reference to something else. Maybe you're cheating on us and changing your name for
maybe
some other.
Maybe that's not even for us.
Yeah, maybe you're changing your name for some other podcast. But either way, thank you all very much for supporting us at the $15 level. For those of you who don't know, you get access to all kinds of stuff, the bonus content, early access, but then you also get priority recommendation at the $15 level, where if you have something you'd really like to hear us talk about, you recommend it, and we'll throw it as high on our list as we can put it. All right, time to find out what people thought about Ever After.
Yeah, well, that's just like your opinion, man.
So we didn't get a ton of feedback.
I'm annoyed
for this
about this.
What, you're annoyed about it?
The lack of comments.
Yeah.
We had all these people vote for it, and then 4 people said stuff about it.
I actually talked to Shelby about this too, because she messaged me on Twitter and was like, it's weird. And I was like, it's weird.
I just thought it was interesting because so many people said, I love this, you know what I mean? I thought we would get more. And it's not, whatever. Maybe people didn't see the polls. There's lots of reasons that people might not have left feedback, but it was surprising to me.
I think that, I think we lost the favor of the algorithm gods, because we were posting during the bracket, we were posting super consistently, and then we weren't.
Right.
But also, I think it's possible that a lot of the people who voted in the bracket are not people who usually give feedback.
Well, that's fair. I wasn't even necessarily talking about the number of people. I wasn't expecting, dozens and dozens of comments, but this is less than we normally get, and for something that people had a choice in picking, I expected, or had a hand in choosing, I expected slightly more. That's all I'll say. I
was hoping to get more feedback, but it is what it is.
Yep.
We do have a handful of comments. On Patreon, we had 5 votes for the movie and 2 for the book. My favorite Cinderella is the one from the Fable series of comic books, said, definitely the movie, because it makes Danielle a real breathing human being that I can connect with. I don't necessarily fault the folklore, but due to their general brevity and the way they have been retold so many times, Cinderella feels more like a trope than a person that I can connect with and have empathy for.
I think that makes sense.
Yeah, that's a fair assessment. It is something like what we're hitting on here is something that I actually really love about folklore, because it's tropey, but I find that super fascinating because they're like the trope blueprints.
Right, they're the origins
Yeah.
of many of the tropes in,
Yeah.
in a lot of ways, yeah.
Also, I have read a couple of the Fables comic books. I at one point was like, oh, I'm going to read all of these, and I get super overwhelmed by existing series of comics with dozens and dozens of editions. So I ended up never actually doing that. But I did read the Cinderella from Fabletown with Love comic and really enjoyed it. She's like a spy
Sweet.
in that series. So kind of cool. On Facebook, we didn't have any comments, but we did have 4 votes for the movie, 0 for the book. Facebook is the place where I really suspect we lost the algorithm.
Very clearly, yeah.
Yeah. Because we were getting very good engagement for us on Facebook during the brackets.
It's really frustrating that the algorithm exists
Yeah.
at all.
Yeah.
Just show me the things that I follow. And you can recommend me some other stuff, but just show me the things that I follow. Don't not show me things. It's so frustrating.
On Twitter, we had 11 votes for the movie and 3 for the book. Shelby says Monsters and Mayhem is out now. Said, maybe I'm a sucker for the classic version in this case, but I'm going with the book. I enjoyed the movie, but I did find it a bit overstuffed with plot. Although I will say I liked how they combined the stepmother ruining the dress with the ball scene. I wasn't expecting that.
Normally she ruins it before the ball.
Yeah, well, that's in the Disney version.
Or you say, I say normally. In the Disney version, it's like, well, I think in the Roger and the Hammer scene, though, at least the stage version that we saw, I think it was
I can't
also.
remember if she does that.
I'm fairly certain. Well, she does. I remember her ripping it up.
Yeah.
And then she like spins and it all.
Yeah.
Well, at least in the stage.
That happened. I mean, that
saw.
happens in other versions, but I think that's like kind of known from the 1950 Disney.
Yeah, I'm
version,
not
is
saying
my
it's
point.
not. I'm just saying that there are. Yeah, it's not normally at the ball. It's normally. Yeah.
And overstuffed with plot, that's a totally valid criticism of the movie. We talked about that too.
Yeah.
There's just maybe a
couple
few
too
too
many
many
things.
things
Yeah.
going on. Ben Thompson said, it was interesting hearing about the different versions of Cinderella. Good episode, heart. Thank you, Ben.
Brief, but yeah.
I
Appreciate it.
fudged that one off of a different post because
Oh,
we had
gotcha.
so few comments.
Yeah.
It's fine, though. On Instagram, we had 7 votes for the movie and 4 for the book. Back from Neverland said, I agree with Katie, the movie is better. I love the small details y'all pointed out, and I can't think of another fairy tale retelling that uses proper restraint and is still not boring.
I don't know if I've seen enough fairy tale retellings.
I think that's an interesting and I would say accurate. Like for me, that feels like an accurate assessment of this retelling. It is like somewhat restrained.
Yeah. In a way
but-
that something like the most recent Cinderella seems not to be.
Yeah.
Yeah. Again, having not seen it. I will say, for my memory, the 2015, as much as I had some issues with the 2015 Cinderella, I don't remember that. I feel like that was fairly restrained in sort of the the steps it, like the changes it made and the liberties it took with the story. And I don't remember finding it boring. Again, I found it maybe a little boring in the sense that I thought they could have made more changes.
I don't
and I guess
know
that's
that
kind of what
I
they're
found
saying.
it. I don't know that I found that one boring, but I didn't find it like particularly interesting.
And I
like,
guess
it
that's
wasn't
kind of
doing
what-
anything super new and fresh.
I
with it.
think that's kind of the point of what they're saying is that it's restrained, but it's still doing stuff that is interesting. It's right in that sweet spot.
Yeah. Corinne Neva said, I love both for different moods. I grew up on the Grimm's version where I loved the brutal comeuppance, for all the stories really, and Ever After for the daydream quality of it. But I think I would pick the movie because she was loved for her personality and it's fun. I will always love that in my book, the prince is fooled twice by the stepsisters cutting off parts of their feet to make the shoe fit, and has to have a bird tell him, hey, so there's blood just streaming from her foot. You might want to ask a few questions as they're riding to his palace. We talked about that a little bit.
Prince of Himbo.
Yeah, he's a little bit of a himbo. That's from the Grimm's version. Also, I always thought that Lepu bought their stuff either because he was obsessed with Danielle and was creepily touching her things, or because he was new to wealth and was trying to buy the trappings of ruling class life.
Interesting. That's not the read I got on it. Like I said, I just assumed he was like, because when you see it, it seemed like he was like like we said, like a
just kind of a skeezy,
like selling like a black market, like buying stuff from one person and then like a pawn shop. Not that all pawn shop people are skeezy.
All interesting reads. I think his character is just not developed enough. To know for sure what the motivation is supposed to be.
2 scenes.
Yeah.
Or something like that. Yeah.
So our listener poll's winner was the movie with 27 votes to the book's 9.
There you go.
So a bit of a runaway.
Kind of what I expected.
Yeah.
Honestly. Pretty much what I expected. All right. We do have a Learning Things segment this week, and what we're learning about are period films.
No matter what anybody tells you, words and ideas can change the world.
So learning about them, maybe not so much, maybe just more like chatting about them. Okay. So I thought this might be interesting to discuss because I personally think that the terms period film, period piece, period drama, historical drama, costume drama, all of the above kind of get bandied about a bit. And I think we all like generally understand what's meant by period film, but like I was curious if there was an official definition or like actual criteria for what is considered a period piece. Like mostly I was just wondering if it's actually as simple as the story is set in the past. 'Cause like our last episode was set during like the Renaissance kinda.
Right.
But I don't know that I would refer to that film as a period piece.
I don't want to step on toes here with where you're going to go with this. I have not read it. But to me, just going in without any, like, I think you could call it a period piece. I think you wouldn't because other descriptors might supersede that.
I have a note about that later.
That's kind of how I would go about it. Like, if something is... there may be something like a genre that it fits into that supersedes it being a period piece, but I don't think it would be incorrect to call Ever After a period piece. You know what I mean?
Yeah,
Anyways.
So I dove in to try to find out more, and after looking into it, it turns out that it actually is as simple as that.
Yeah.
Well, I was just wondering.
No, okay. No, yeah, totally, yeah.
Wikipedia defines period piece, or I think theirs actually was like historical drama was the name of the article, but it's all kind of the same thing. So Wikipedia defines it as a work set in a past time period, usually used in the context of film and television. Another definition I found was a work of art set in or reminiscent of an earlier time period. TV Tropes got a little more specific. They added, it's kind of hard to define what defines period films per se. Something that took place a decade ago could count, technically, but period pieces set in the very recent past are rare unless it's to poke fun at the era in question, which I don't know if I necessarily agree with.
I would only disagree insofar as I think the delineation there would be it can be set in the very recent past and be a period piece even if it's not poking fun, as long as that area that period that it's set in the recent past is distinct enough from our current period.
Yeah. And I have some thoughts on that later.
That is how I would say. So like something set in the early 2000s could be a period piece. Kind of, at least I don't know if I would use that phrase, but I think you could argue in favor of calling it a period piece if it's because that like the fashion and the pop culture and whatnot is distinct enough from our current, but something set 4 years ago maybe not so much. Anyway, sorry, I don't want to. I want to
Yeah,
just
you're
run all over what you're
jumping way ahead of me.
I'm sorry. I just want to talk about it as we're going, and then
So at that point, I got bored with researching because I wasn't finding anything that was new or interesting. It was basically just the same pretty broad definition over and over. So I'm just gonna spitball some thoughts. And we can chat about it and let you guys weigh in the comment sections after this episode goes up. So I think for me, where my kind of curiosity about this came in was that while, yes, any film set in the past is technically a period piece, I feel like the term period piece and its synonyms are most frequently used to describe only specific types of historical films.
often, not always.
Yeah, like most frequently.
Yes,
Like,
most frequently,
yeah, like-
and by the broadest amount of people. Yes.
Yeah, like anything you could vaguely like to me, it seems most often it's like the Austen-esque Oscar Beatty sweeping scenery kind of films
Yes.
that usually get labeled a period piece.
Right.
Like anything that you could vaguely place anywhere from 1800 to like the 1920s.
Yes.
Western.
I would extend it further back than that, but yes.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And I feel like the types of movies that usually get this label are often like stylistically very similar. Lots of emphasis on setting and costumes. The story often has something to do with like it's either vaguely a coming of age kind of thing, or it's more frequently like pining for lost or unrequited love. Again, like Austen-esque.
Interesting.
You know?
I don't know if I would necessarily make that same categorization.
I'm
Or
not
add,
saying-
I would not. I'm not. I don't know if I would add those kind of like additional.
I'm not saying that that's the correct
Right.
definition
I know,
of
yeah.
a period piece. I'm saying that, like, from my perspective, it seems like this is the type of film that I most often hear
Hear called
labeled
that, right.
period piece, whereas other works that are set in the past, I don't so much hear people call a period piece.
Interesting. I'm gonna stop. I don't want to keep jumping in and saying my thoughts because I'm sure I'm just gonna repeat. I don't want to preempt what you're gonna say.
To actually touch on something that you brought up earlier, I was thinking that like why I think that kind of narrow definition happens, at least for me, is that a film that's set in the past but is also another genre. Like
Yeah.
you said, like for me, that other genre will trump the period piece label.
Yeah.
Like I would be more likely to call Ever After a fantasy than a period piece.
I don't think I would because it doesn't have any fantastical elements.
I think I just want to do that because it's based on a fairy tale. Like
And
I
get
agree
that.
with you
I
that
get
there's
that
not like
aspect of it.
like there's not magic in it or like fantasy creatures.
I generally would, to call something a fantasy, it would have to have some fantastical element
Mm-hmm.
of some sort, whether that be magic or magical creatures or something.
Yeah.
Or be set in a non-Earth,
Yeah.
even if it doesn't necessarily have magic, like I could, if it's set in a
a made up kingdom.
a made up kingdom that trying to think of an example, and I can't think of one because all of them have
The
magic.
Princess Diaries 2 is set in a made up kingdom.
Yeah. Right. Well, I guess an example like that's close, and it does still kind of have magic. Not kind of. It does have magic. Is Princess Bride, but it's close.
Yeah.
But it does have magical like the ROUSs, and like it
Right,
has.
yeah.
But it's all stuff that's right on the line of like magic versus, you know what I mean, and like the resurrection pill, but
Yeah.
like you could make an argument that maybe he's like literally it's just like an adrenaline shot type of deal. Like I don't know, like
Right.
you could
And
probably come up
I
with
think my other thing with Ever After is that it feels kind of similarly Ren Fair-ish
yes.
to me.
It has the vibe of
Yeah.
fantasy for
It has
sure.
the fantasy
aesthetic,
vibe.
and the aesthetic, yeah, definitely.
But there are also a lot of like westerns that are period dramas. But if you asked me, I'd be like, that's a western.
It's a western,
I
yeah.
wount say, oh yeah, that's a period
No.
piece. But
No,
even though it is,
not first. My addendum to this is that I would often refer to it maybe as both. Like I would say like it depending on the film, I might use both and I might use them interchangeably. Like I might, because to me often period piece, I think what's the most interesting about this question is there are some movies that I might basically only refer to them as not only, but like that might be the main thing I referred to them as. Whereas a lot of other movies like Ever After, like, pick a Western or even, like I'm trying to think of another example. Like a spy movie set in like World War II or something. I'm trying to think of if there was like a spy movie set in World War II or even any movie set in World War II, I would probably call it like a war movie or like a first. Yeah. And then, but I might also refer to it as a period piece. Like I don't think I wouldn't, So it is one of those things where it's almost usually like a secondary. Again,
and I wonder if that's just a self-fulfilling prophecy because we tend to think of period pieces like a little more narrow than what the actual definition is, because the actual definition is quite broad.
And I think that's why is because the definition is so broad, it becomes kind of useless.
That's fair.
You know what I mean?
Yeah.
Like as a primary descriptor, at least, like because it is just anything set more than 5 years ago, that makes use of that setting in a way that is placeable. Like you can tell that it takes place during a time period, not now.
Right.
Because that's basically all there is to the definition. You kind of have to use other categorizations. You have to be like, oh, it's a Western, but it's a period Western. So like,
right.
Because there are modern Westerns, like Hell or High Water came out, I don't know, 5 or 6 years ago, and it's set in modern, or what at the time, modern day Texas or whatever. But I would call that a Western, at least to some extent. It's fudgeable, but like I would probably call that a Western. But at the time, I would not have called that, at least from my memory. I don't think it's set. I think it was set like contemporaneously, roughly from when it came out. So I wouldn't call that a period piece, but I would call it a Western. Whereas a Western set in the the 30s or whatever, or the 1890s or whatever, I would call a Western.
I guess
and a
maybe
period Western.
With the self-fulfilling prophecy thing, I'm more interested in like why it's this specific like time period and type of movie that I'm more likely to refer to as a period piece.
Right.
Because like, okay, 2 examples. Something like Pride and Prejudice.
I guess that was about, because that was the main one that jumps to my head is like
Pride and Prejudice is a romance.
Yes.
But I'm more likely to refer to it as a period piece. Now, if we go to something a little bit more recent in the scope of history, what is the name of that movie? You're a Bird, I'm a Bird. Gah.
That sounds familiar, but I need more.
You're a bird, I'm a bird. What is the name of that movie? It's a Nicholas Sparks movie. The Notebook.
Oh.
The Notebook. The Notebook kind of does like a time jump around thing, but the bulk of the story is set in like the 40s.
Yeah.
Making it a period piece. But I'm more likely to refer to The Notebook as a romance.
Yeah. I think a big part of it to me, and maybe you're gonna again, I don't want to jump ahead and
it's fine.
Is that for me, I think a thing that can lend to us calling something a period piece more prominently is how much of a character the era is.
Okay.
How important the time period is to the story and how much it is like infused in it. So like here's another example that I would actually probably call a period piece. At least to some extent, when describing it, even though it's very much a whole specific genre on its own and multiple genres, is Stranger Things. Mm-hmm. Stranger Things is a period piece.
Yes, the 80s is its own
It's
character.
effusive within the show.
Yeah, that's
in the same
point.
way that something like in Pride and Prejudice, the again, because of like in Pride and Prejudice, the morality, like the mores of the time period, obviously the costumes and everything, but that's always true for like every movie. But like the characters' actions and how they act and how they interact with each other is very much tied to the time period that it takes place, at least to some extent. in a way that makes it more of a period piece than you know, something like maybe Ever After, where it doesn't feel as tied to the time period. That's when it takes place, but like the characters, and there is quite, I mean, there's kings and like there, it's not that it's not there, but it just, I don't know. And it is, I think the whole thing, what it really boils down to is it's just vibes. Like it's just you, like like you just get the vibe of the thing and you're like, that's a period piece or it's not. I don't know. Like you can just,
You just feel it.
and I think it does
it.
kind of come down to how much of a character the time period is, in the same way that like in some, you know, shows or whatever, how much of a character the setting is. Not that has its own genre, but like there are some shows and some movies where the setting of the thing is as much of a character as the characters are. And I think there are some shows and movies where the time period that takes place is as much of a character, quote unquote, as the characters are, and other things that take place in other time periods where that isn't the case, and so we don't call them period pieces. Anyways, at least that's kind of, I think, like where I would land on it.
I also think, and I think you kind of brought this up earlier, for some stuff, like once you get around like mid-century-ish, I think it feels more modern and familiar and feels a little less like history with a capital H. So I feel like maybe we're less likely to refer to that stuff as a period piece for that reason.
Yeah.
Like The Perks of Being a Wallflower is set in like 1991.
Right.
But I wouldn't refer to it
I would
as
not.
a period piece.
No, because and
But
that's
it
is. But there's also shows and movies and stuff that intentionally try to make things feel more timeless than they are.
True.
Or not, you know, make them feel more timeless than the period that they're set. Because I was just thinking of another example, like a recent example of Goodfellas. I wouldn't call that a period piece necessarily, but the 80s is. But a big part of that too is that we span multiple time periods, so it kind of gets complicated because we're in the 50s and 60s for a while or whatever, and then we go to the 70s and 80s, and so it's hard to like you can't nail down a single period of time there, so it's hard to call it a period piece in that regard. And it's also much more focused on the characters and what they're doing, and less about the time period. Even though that it plays a role, it's not. It just feels different. I don't know. It is. Like I said, I think it's just purely like vibes.
All right.
It's the same way you just what is and isn't porn. It's purely vibes based. Like there's no, you can't, you know what I mean? Like you can't.
I can't define a period film, but I know it when I see it.
You know it when you see it. Yeah, exactly.
All right. Well, thank you for letting me ramble incoherently after my research segment did not go as planned. Please sound off in the comments. Let us know what you think defines period / historical / costume piece / film / drama, all those things. Is it the vibes or is it something else?
It's the vibes. To be fair, it's the vibes is everything. Like that's also how you determine if a movie's good, whether anybody wants to admit it or not.
Yeah.
It's purely the vibes because it sums up everything. There's this effervescent quality. They're like, no, that's not even the right word. There's this like sum total quality of a thing, and that's how you decide if something's good or not. It's the same thing. Like there isn't as much, you know, you can look at the technical stuff, but when you're deciding like deep down whether you think something is good or not, you're not usually, unless you're doing something, unless you have like a very detailed rubric that you're using. Even if you think you have a detailed rubric in your head, unless you're literally like filling out a detailed like point sheet rubric or something, it's all vibes based, and anybody who says different is lying. Like it just is. This is how everything works. Like in terms of criticism,
I'm gonna start citing the vibes in my final verdicts.
I do love that term only because I do think it encapsulates, and I'm sure there's other previous terms for the same. You know, there are other terms that have come and gone through history that describe the same sort of thing, but it does capture how I at least take in a film or a piece of media or whatever and assess it, and then decide whether I like it or not. And I think it's how everybody does it, again, whether they admit it or not. I think it is kind of how everybody assesses media. So,
But to kind of sort of counterpoint, I think it is possible to be like, I recognize that this is a well-made piece of art, but the vibes were not there for me.
Yes, that is true. But even that, I still think I guess I'm maybe using vibes more broadly. I'm using it as like, again, an all-encompassing, like nebulous sort of arithmetic that your brain does almost subconsciously. And it doesn't necessarily mean you have to like the thing. It just I don't know. I'm doing a bit like I get what you're saying, and I do.
Like Blue is the Warmest Color, I recognized was a very well-made film, but the vibes were not there for me.
Oh, really? I thought you liked that. Did you?
It was fine.
Okay. Yeah. And It's I don't know. It's interesting. It's an interesting discussion. Like Katie said, we'd be happy to hear. Very interested to hear what other people think about it. So, time now for us to learn a little bit more about the book, The Remains of the Day.
Well, no gentleman call is allowed, of course. If two members of staff happen to fall in love and decide to get married, there is nothing one can say. But what I do find a major irritation are those persons who are simply going from post to post looking for romance.
For the past 30 years, this has been the world of Stevens the butler.
A man cannot call himself well contented until he has done all he can to be of service to his employer.
Within the protective walls of Darlington Hall,
What happens within this house during the conference could have repercussions on the whole course that Europe is taking.
I understand fully.
he has led a life of perfect order and total control.
You don't like to have pretty girls on the staff, I've noticed.
Might it be that our Mr. Stevens fears distraction?
The Remains of the Day is a 1989 novel by British author Kazuo Ishiguro. Sir Kazuo Ishiguro. He's a novelist, screenwriter, musician, short story writer. He was born in Nagasaki in Japan and moved to Britain in 1960 with his parents when he was around 5. He's considered one of the most celebrated contemporary fiction authors writing in English. Another of his novels that you might recognize is 2005's Never Let Me Go. That's like his other big one. He was awarded the Nobel Prize in Literature in 2017. So that's pretty...
I guess they do Nobel Prizes in literature as like a career.
Yeah, it's like an overall thing.
It's not like, you wrote a great book.
Work. No.
Okay.
So The Remains of the Day follows the character Stevens, who is a butler with a long record of service at Darlington Hall, which is a stately home near Oxford in England. And he reminisces about events at Darlington Hall in the 1920s and 1930s, although I believe the novel is actually set in the 50s. So a period piece.
Mm-hmm.
This is
if it's like the movie, I don't know if it is, but it's like there's like a flashback, or it's like set in 2 time periods. It's post-war
right, yeah.
and during the war, or pre-war, I think. It's like post and pre-war.
It sounds like it's a little bit of all 3, maybe.
Yeah.
So this is one of the most highly regarded post-war British novels. It won the Booker Prize in 1989, and it ranks 146th on a Stanford University list of the best 20th century English language fiction. In 2007, The Remains of the Day was included in a Guardian list of books you can't live without, and also in a 2009 1,000 novels everyone must read list. On November 5th of 2019, the BBC News listed The Remains of the Day on its list of the 100 most influential novels. So according to literary scholar Stephen Connor, The Remains of the Day thematizes.
Is that? Yeah, I was about to say, what?
Pretty sure is how that word is pronounced. I looked that one up too, and I never remember to make notes in the actual
Thematizes?
Thematizes.
Because what's funny, because when you say it, it's thematically, right. But then you would say thematize.
Thematize.
I hate that. I don't like thematize. That sounds fake. Yeah, that sounds fake. I don't like that.
Thematizes the idea of English national identity. In the main character's view, the qualities of the best butlers, which involve restraining personal emotions in favor of keeping up appearances, are quote, identified as essentially English.
I mean, it is the stereotype.
Based on stereotypes of English people that I'm familiar with, that sounds correct.
Yep.
Connor further argued that early critics of Remains of the Day, who saw it as a novel about Japanese national identity, were mistaken, saying, quote, there seems to be no doubt that it is Englishness that is at stake or under analysis in this novel. And I feel like early critics of Remains of the Day may have been a little racist.
I mean, they saw the author's name maybe and were like, there you go. And didn't realize maybe they didn't. Well, to be fair, back then you might not have known. And like, not to be fair, but like.
But if they read the book.
Yeah. Well, I mean, maybe they, because I don't know. I don't know enough to say whether there's any correlation between that type of, that type of person, like national identity between Japan and Britain. I don't know if they share any similarities there. I have no idea.
Fair.
But I'm saying if you just saw the author's name,
well, right,
and then you couldn't Google, oh, he moved to Britain when he was 5, so like this is about growing, this is about his British identity. I don't know. I don't know. I could see.
I mean, if you just said to me like, author of Japanese descent wrote a book about like post World War II. What do you think it's about? Like, but most obvious guess is like, oh, it's about like the aftermath of like the atomic bombs and like losing the war.
Yeah,
and
right.
blah, blah,
Yes.
blah.
Yeah.
But like, I'm a little ways into the book, and it seems pretty clear to me that if you read the book, you probably would be like, oh yeah, this is about being British.
Yes, I get that, and it's clearly set in Britain, and it's about a British butler. Like, I'm just saying that I don't know. Like, if you were trying to read deeper into it, if you thought it was like a Japanese author selling a story set in post-war Britain, that. If you didn't know any, and again, I'm not trying to. It's very likely that it's just racism or whatever, but that there could be, because it's not saying
like drawing some kind of parallel.
Yes,
between
Like I could see a critic or somebody trying to read deeper into it and go, oh well, sure it's set in Britain, but maybe it's actually about sort of Japanese sentiments and stuff like that, and is just using this setting to explore those ideas. And again, if you didn't know, he was raised in, like, he doesn't remember Japan. He was 5 when he moved. You know what I mean? Like,
right.
I don't know. I think it's potentially understandable, but also maybe not. I have no idea. I'm just wildly speculating here. So, all right, time to learn a little bit more about The Remains of the Day, the film.
Good-looking woman.
A first-rate housekeeper is essential in a house like this where great affairs are decided.
But as the world outside was changing,
The United States does not want war any more than you do. On the other hand, neither would we care for peace at any price.
so was the world inside Darlington Hall.
You do realize that over the last few years, his lordship has been the most important pawn that the Nazis have in this country.
It is not my place to be curious about such matters.
We have some refugee girls on the staff. You'll have to let them go. They're Jews.
How long can he shut his eyes to what he sees around him?
If those girls go, I shall leave this house.
I'd be lost without her.
How long can he close his heart?
Mr. Stevens, I accepted Mr. Ben's proposal of marriage.
You have my warmest congratulations.
To what he feels inside.
The Remains of the Day is a 1993 film directed by James Ivory, also directed A Room with a View, Howard's End, and wrote Call Me By Your Name. It was written by Ruth Prower, Ruth Prower Jabvala. I also could not find a good pronunciation for this. Who basically was James Ivory's co-writer, unlike everything from what it looked like. Wrote Howard's End, A Room with a View.
I love A Room with a View.
I have not seen it. Bunch of other stuff. The film stars Anthony Hopkins, Emma Thompson, James Fox, Christopher Reeve, Peter Vaughn, Hugh Grant, Michael Lonsdale, Tim Pigott-Smith, and Lena Headey. Yes, it is Lena Headey from Game of Thrones. She was like 20 or something in this, or maybe even younger than that. I don't know. She was one of her earlier roles.
Yeah.
The film has a 95% on Rotten Tomatoes, an 86% on Metacritic, and a 7.8 out of 10 on IMDb. And she's actually one of 3 people from Game of Thrones in this show. And I don't know if I mentioned Peter Vaughn was one of the other ones. I think the third person I didn't make it into my credits here. Peter Vaughn, I believe, was the old Meister at Winter's Keep who like died after like the actor died after like the first or second season. And then there was one other guy who, and I don't think he was in here. The film made $63.9 million against a budget of $15 million and was nominated for 8 Oscars, including Best Picture, Best Actor for Anthony Hopkins, Best Actress for Emma Thompson, Best Director, Best Adapted Screenplay, Best Art Direction, Best Costume Design, and Best Music Original Score, but it did not win any of them.
Oh.
I don't know. Let's see, it
bad.
was 93. I don't know what else was. Well, it would have been the 94 Oscars. I'm not sure if something cleaned up that year. Oh, Schindler's List cleaned up in 94. Oh, Philadelphia was also that year. But yeah, Schindler's List
I mean,
cleaned up.
When you're nominated in one of the other movies is Schindler's List.
Yeah, you're going to have a tough time. Yep. Yes, indeed. So, the novel originally was set to be adapted by a completely different director, Mike Nichols, who's most known for regarding Henry the Birdcage and Charlie Wilson's War. And the script was going to be by Harold Pinter. And so apparently some of Pinter's script did end up being used in this film, but his name ended up being removed from the script, and we'll get to why they ended up not being involved with the film here at some point a little bit later. But he basically had his name removed from the script because it was not enough of him in it he didn't want his name in it anymore. On inside the actor's studio, Sir Anthony Hopkins, because he is a knight, said that he got tips on how to play butler from a real-life butler, Cyril Dickman, who served for 50 years at Buckingham Palace, I believe, as the primary butler. Dickman said, quote, "There's nothing to being a butler, really. When you're in the room, it should be even more empty."
Wow.
End quote.
I feel like that is like the ultimate butler position.
Yep.
Like you're the butler to end all butlers when you buttle at
Buckingham Palace. Yeah, absolutely. So the part of Miss Kenton, who ends up being played by Dame Emma Thompson in the film, is one of only 3 movie roles, supposedly, this is IMDb trivia, for which Meryl Streep had ever been turned down. Now, we will get into why right now. According to a book called Hit and Run that came out, I don't remember when it came out, but it was about the 1990s at Sony Pictures, Columbia Pictures, and TriStar. Basically about like
what was going on.
What was going on in those studios during the 90s. The reason that Mike Nichols and Meryl Streep didn't direct and star in the film was because of the budget. So apparently the budget got slashed because executives at the time were unhappy with the rising costs of production and how much money they were spending on talent. And so they decided to slash the budget for the film from apparently $30 million down to like $15 million. And when that happened, Mike Nichols and Meryl Streep were no longer on the project.
I thought you were going to say it was because Meryl Streep wasn't British.
No, that doesn't seem to be the case. It was purely because they couldn't afford her after they cut the budget. Instead, got Emma Thompson.
Can't afford Meryl Streep anymore, guys.
Yeah. And then my last note here, some other people who were considered, or one other person who was, sorry, a couple other people who were considered for roles. One for the role of Stevens, who was played by Anthony Hopkins in the film. The role was initially offered to John Cleese, who actually loved Ishiguro's novel. However, he withdrew after he read Harold Pinter's draft of the script, which is funny because it didn't end up mostly being used. But he didn't like Pinter's draft because he loved the novel so much, and he said Pinter, quote, took the humor out of it and made it relentlessly down.
Oh.
According to John Cleese, and he didn't want to be part of it after that. And then also, at one other point in time, the role of, what is her name? Miss Kenton was courted to Angelica Houston, but did not end up landing the part. Instead, went with Emma Thompson. So
could have had back-to-back Angelica.
Yeah, we've had a lot of movies, honestly, for how, like, I mean, she's been in quite a bit of stuff, but not like, not like Meryl Streep or something. And we haven't had a single Meryl Streep movie yet. So I think it is interesting that, we've had so many movies with Angelica Houston.
You know what else is interesting about that to me? I guess I don't know at what point in her career Emma Thompson was at this time.
Very early, I think.
Okay.
I could be wrong,
It
but I
seems
think
like Meryl Streep to Emma Thompson would not be that much of a paycheck cut. It seems like to me.
Definitely
but
wouldn't.
I guess in that time.
Yeah, definitely in the time period. I think even today, like, regardless of time period, I do not think Emma Thompson costs nearly as much as Meryl Streep does. But
okay, I guess I just like Emma Thompson.
I like Emma Thompson as well. I'm just saying she's not Meryl Streep in terms of
Emma
prestige.
Thompson as much as Meryl Streep.
There you go.
I'm here for you, Dame Emma Thompson.
Fantastic.
Defending you.
Yeah. But yeah, she was in Howard's End as well, so there's a connection there with
the writer and the director, yeah.
Which would make sense. And also why Anthony Hopkins, because he was also in Howard's End. So there you go.
This is just a Howard's End reunion.
It really is, apparently. That's all I got for that. Before we wrap up, we wanted to remind you that you can do us a giant favor by supporting us on Patreon, as we mentioned at the top, and by following us on social media. Please follow us on social media and respond, give us comments about stuff.
Tell us what you think a period piece is.
We're really interested in hearing that discussion continue about period pieces and what makes a period piece. So go follow us on Facebook, Twitter, Instagram, all those places. Also, before we wrap up, we wanted to mention that this was an Academy Award-winning patron request by Eli Youngs. So Eli, thank you for recommending The Remains of the Day. We're looking forward to checking it out. Where can the people watch it?
Well, as always, you can check your local library. Probably a pretty good chance they have both the book and the movie.
Seems like
or if you still have a local video rental store, you can support them. Lord knows they need it. Otherwise, you can stream this with ads on Tubi.
I saw that. It's on Tubi,
yeah. Or you can rent it for around $3 to $4 on Amazon, Vudu, Apple TV, YouTube, Redbox, DirecTV, or AMC Theaters on Demand.
There you go. I'm interested to check this one out because it looks painfully British.
The book so far is very British.
Yeah, I am interested to see. I don't know. It's one of those movies that I've heard of.
Yeah.
And just knew nothing, and still feel like I know nothing about. Like
it's about a butler.
It's about a butler, and I just don't know what the point is. You know what I mean? Like I'm very interested to see what is this movie doing? What is it saying?
I don't know what it's going to be saying, but I think based on what I have seen and read thus far, that there's going to be a pining, unrequited love between Anthony Hopkins and Emma Thompson.
Interesting.
That's my prediction.
There you go. Well, we shall see. And we shall see in 1 week's time when we're talking about The Remains of the Day. Until that time, guys, gals, my binary pals, everybody else.
Keep reading books.
Watching movies.
And keep being awesome.